Hallelujah. There is something that we must do and we must know. And the Lord has spoken to me very clearly about tonight. And I want you to understand something, that what we're facing right now is a time in history that no one has ever lived to see before until right now. Now, the prophets saw it in the days of old, but no one lived to see it until now. See, you were born into a world you were not created to live in. See, you were born into a world that had already fallen. Now, the Lord said to tell you something, so I'm going to tell you. See, Satan is not trying to just take over America this time. America's in his way. He's trying to take over a world this time. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I want you to really listen to me just a few moments. I don't know how much time I have, but the Lord just spoke a word, rumble, in my spirit, so that's just what I sang about, was a rumble. And just so that you know, Florida and Tennessee is about to come together in a big way, because revival blew in off the sea and it arrived in Tennessee. And this thing is about to come together in a huge way. You'll see. You're not hearing me, but you will see it. There's something in Florida and Tennessee that's about to happen. Now, see, Satan this is the time he thought he had the world. He thinks he really has it this time. Now, what I'm going to tell you is this. Lord, how you want me to say that? I'll say it any way you tell me. See, Satan fights in cycles. He's not a very powerful being. If he was the hot rod he claimed to be, he would have killed you 2 seconds before you got saved. But all he could do was wait till you got saved and then tell you you didn't get saved. Yes, it's the truth. Now, I want you to really watch this now, because I'm going to have to go quickly here. A long time ago, there was a king who had the crown over a nation, but everyone knew his wife had the power. During their time, the killing of children proliferated huge. During their time, there was a huge land scandal. Someone came up murdered during that scandal. It had to do with a vineyard. During that time, this king was wounded, but he managed to stay up until the end of the day. And then when he died, they washed his chariot clean, and the dogs licked up his blood. Now, fast forward in history, and there was a president in this nation. He had the authority, he had the title, but everyone knew his wife had the power. During their time, the killing of children arose huge. During their time, there was a huge land scandal. During their time, and right after during the land scandal, someone came up murdered. Right after that happened, they vacationed in a vineyard called Martha's. During his time, he was wounded in the middle of his second term, But he managed to stay up until the end of his term. He was impeached, but he never left office. During his time, finally, in the old king's life, when he died, his wife decided she was going to run the nation. So she went back to run the nation. And when she did, the Lord raised up a war captain to come against her. So now when this war captain came against her, everybody knew this war captain because he drove so recklessly. They looked at him across the field coming at him, and one said, "Who is that?" He said, "I don't know. He drives like Jehu because he's reckless." So this war captain, he debated her, and they threw her off the wall. And the Bible was very specific about this, and it was the most unusual thing. It says that 2 or 3 eunuchs. It's usually very specific. But it said 2 or 3 eunuchs stepped out and threw her off the wall. When she landed on the ground, her blood splattered against the wall, and the dogs ate her, all but her head and her hands. So here it is. This war captain goes ahead and takes over. He begins to bring the nation around. He rids the nation of Baal worship. He did all of that. Now I want you to really stay with me a minute, because I've got to jump on something, because I don't have a lot of time. And so, are you interested, or should I just? Okay. So he rid the land of Baal worship, and they had peace 28 years. 28's the number of eternity. So they had peace for 28 years. Now, let's fast forward again. When the king that you all knew of, when he left office, they washed his office out as if he had never done anything wrong. And the blue dogs licked up his blood. So she decided she's going to run the nation. So she eventually comes out and begins to debate. When she starts to debate, God raises up a war captain, just like in the old days. In the old days, the war captain's name was Jehu, son of Nimshi, which means freed from restraint. There was a modern war captain raised up. His name was John McCain, and he was famous for being freed from prison. And it was an exact parallel. And Satan can only fight in cycles. He's not a supernatural being. He fights in cycles, and he watches cycles. And he knows prophetic cycles. And he watches them very close, because he's a fallen being. So now he watches these prophetic cycles, and he began to notice one in 92. Now, what happened in this prophetic cycle? In the old one, the original thing with Ahab and Jezebel, what took place was Jehu had her thrown off the wall. He brought peace to the land, rid the land of Baal worship. But in the modern cycle, the modern Jehu didn't have enough in him to throw her off the wall. So her own people threw her off the wall. But Jehu McCain didn't run over her. Right there, Satan took a cycle, and one of the eunuchs became president. You're not listening to me. One of the eunuchs became the president, and the 28 years of peace were lost. That's why during Barack Obama's presidency, you felt like you had your head in a bag screaming and no one could hear you. It's because it was a time that wasn't supposed to happen for another 28 years. But of course the church didn't know it was coming because they voted all the prophets out. And there was no one to see it. Now you say, why are you telling me all of this? Because of this. There's something in warfare, and that's what I am as a warrior. See, I realize that I'm probably a little different than a lot of folks. But I'm a warrior. I eat and sleep that. And I'm going to tell you, there is something called the art of war. I want you to really pay attention. During the art of war, it's called ideological subversion. And what it means is to change the perception of a new reality. The Soviets were absolutely expert at this. It began in China 2,500 years ago by a man named Sun Tzu. Now, Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War that every Soviet soldier had to study. Most all the American soldiers have a copy of this, at least the leaders. And what it is it's how to win a war without any bloodshed, without anybody fighting. And it's done in 4 stages. The first stage is called demoralization. And what this is this is an out front, legitimate, on the front top, where everyone can see it. It's done in the open. What it is they have to begin to infiltrate colleges, schools, and it's a slow process of brainwashing, and it takes 15 to 20 years to bring the first stage of subversion about. Because they have to change the perception of reality. And it takes a whole educated class, a re-educated class of people to do this. This happened, and we graduated a subverted ideological group of people in this nation in the 60s. The first ones ever. Now you understand what the communist regime meant by when they said, we will destroy you without a shot being fired. Because ideological subversion has to be done by the willingness of the people. So they begin to infiltrate the schools. The colleges teach their ideology, their ideas, and they begin to graduate a class. And that group of people, after 15 or 20 years, takes over government, media. This is what you, and listen to this. In demoralization stage, once someone is demoralized, and it means to take away their hope, to change their ideas. Once it's completed, you can show them all the proof you want, and they cannot see it. The Soviets could take someone to a Soviet concentration camp, and they couldn't see it. And they said you would only see it when a military boot crashed your fat bottom. That was their words. So demoralization started, and we graduated the first classes of it in the 60s. This is why you see newscasters on television right now, that when you look at them and you tell them the truth in black and white, you show them pictures, you show them ideas, they look at you like a dog at a new pan. They just kind of turn their head like this and they look. It's because you're dealing with a subverted mind who absolutely believes what they're saying. And they cannot see the truth. Once a nation enters into demoralization, and once that stage is complete, and it takes 15 to 20 years to do that. Now you'll understand why Barack Obama said what he said in his interview in Peru once he wasn't the president anymore. He just kind of rubbed his head and he said, I don't know. Maybe we were 15 or 20 years too early. And all the newscasters wondered what he meant by that. They really had a big debate about it. He knew what he was talking about. They tried to push the whole 4 stages into being before it was time. And he said, if I'd have waited 15 or 20 years more, I could have done it. So once a nation is demoralized, the next stage they move them into is destabilization. Destabilization takes 2 to 5 years. Once destabilization starts, you can see it. Riots start. You start seeing the nation destabilized everywhere. Riots will begin. Groups will raise up. Black Lives Matter, Antifa, all these places begin to raise up. Who claims out in the open they're Marxist. And yet everybody does this. Because they can't see it. Marxism means nothing to anyone. Now you say, I thought you were a prophet. Prophets shouldn't get involved in politics, should they? Someone should have told Elijah this. And Elisha and Moses. Someone should have told Jesus, because Herod was right in the middle of it the very first day the wise men showed up. They're always in the middle of politics because they're the only ones who will take their finger and stick it on the end of a king's nose and tell them, you've gone rogue. So I want you to stay with me a minute now. I know. Brother Robin, you're too hard. You're just too hard. You're different than most people. I understand. Watch this. So once the destabilization starts, Black Lives Matter told Joe Biden, said, you owe us. You know what they've declared in front of the American people? We are community organizers and trained Marxists. And their very website says they're communist. But people can't see it because they're demoralized. And so during the destabilization process, once they have the nation destabilized, they push it into what's the next stage. It's called crisis. They have to push it into crisis. Now this is what is said, that once you get a nation into the crisis mode, there's no coming back. You cannot pull them back. Once a nation is completely destabilized, completely demoralized, and you throw them into a crisis, it takes about 2 to 6 weeks to do that. And then they said there's no pulling back. The only thing that will pull them back is a civil war or a foreign invasion. Now, that's the only thing. And this is why you saw we invaded Grenada. They were in the 3rd stage of subversion. And a foreign invasion had to come and rescue them. A lot of people didn't even know that. When Czechoslovakia moved into the final stage, it's called normalization. Comrade Brezhnev in those days said, brotherly Czechoslovakia has been normalized when he rolled tanks down their street. And you know what the plan was for America had the Soviets been allowed to continue? They would have took the homosexual activist, the women's lib activist, and they was going to shoot them all. And then all the professors they used, they were sending them to Alaska to train slaves. That was their real plan. So when America started and they started demoralizing us, destabilizing us, and then on January the 6th, I was standing in front of the Capitol in Washington when they tried to throw it into a crisis mode. Now you know Donald Trump suddenly said, go home, everybody go home. So they can't push it into crisis mode. I was standing on a stage and I heard this in the spirit. I was standing on the 11th hour stage and I heard a conversation. I told the people about it. I heard a conversation about shipping. I heard people discussing it in a back room. Shipping and ships and things like that. And they're going to create a crisis. And they're going to try to create this crisis. And I told them, and I sent word to the rightful president of the United States what I heard. And I said, you have to do something. Something must turn now. If they're allowed to do this, the Lord said they're going to do something in 2030 that's irreversible. And so that morning I was standing on the stage and I heard the Lord said, I'm going to do a miracle with a ship. And I told the thing. And then that ship got stuck in the Suez. And they backed up 320 ships full of food and said it was going to throw the world into a crisis that we couldn't hardly recover from. And then suddenly the ship freed itself and came out. There was a lot to that. But this is what they're trying to do. And this is a worldwide thing now. And I was watching Australia as they're being locked down. They're being put in prisons. And they asked the Republican or the conservative think tank, they asked him, they said, is Australia still a free country? He said, that's a good question. I want you to listen to this. That's a good question. He said, this wasn't done in a vacuum. He said, what you see is the normalization. All of the jab was a crisis. It was to throw you into a crisis, throw the world into a crisis, throw every nation into a crisis so that the next thing would be a normalized situation. I'm alone in here. There's nobody listening to what I'm telling you. You say, oh, this is just a political. No, it's not a political speech. I done told you I heard in the prophetic what took place. And now they're talking about the world's being normalized. They figure it's a crisis now to a point that you can't come back. I'm not making, this is exactly what's being talked about. They think it's a crisis already. It's one mask, two masks, three masks, and then one jab, two jab, three jab. Everything's got to keep going, keep going, keep going. It's all about to make you into a crisis mode over the tiniest killing machine on the whole spectrum of death. They know they're doing it. The new variant causes the sniffles. But people are lining up for it. Folks, I'm going to tell you something. God speaks to His church in their spirit, but He speaks to the rest of the world in their DNA. And encoded in their DNA is a cry for freedom. All over the world. It's in a human DNA. You were born free. You were born free. You were born free. That's in every human's DNA. You were born free. I've got to choose my words right. So the only way Satan can figure, you have to remember, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. The only way he will make a slave and keep a slave is to change that DNA. And this was the crawl across the bottom of the screen the other day. And said the pill for this will change human DNA. Now, what's going on? The world is in a crisis mode. The only holdout as a nation is here. It's here. And they're finding it hard to deal with the born-again crowd. Yes, they are. They're finding it very hard to deal with us. So the Lord spoke this to me. He said, everything, when it gets to crisis mode, there's only two things will change it. One is a civil war, and one is a foreign invasion. He said, since there's not going to be a civil war, he said, I'm going to invade from heaven. Oh, come on. Come on. Hallelujah. He said, I'm going to invade from heaven.